I'm back, y'all, after another hiatus. So I apologize for what's about to happen, because it's me again. I'm going to start out with, I'm just read something. I technically posted it on Facebook a couple weeks ago. So if you saw it, oh no, that one is later on. Anyway, I'm going to be reading a tweet, or at least dramatizing a tweet a little bit for you real quick. Give you a little Dickensian scenario to start out with today, if I might. An apparition appears in your room alongside a more successful looking version of yourself. The apparition says, "And this is what you would be." As the other you cries out, "No, no, spare me these twisted visions, Spectre. I've learned my lesson," as they both vanish, leaving you alone again. I found it entertaining. The bit there, clearly, mimicking the idea that what if you could see the other end of that Scrooge scenario of being shown being on the other end of that scenario, being shown as the error, the result of the errors. But as you think of that scenario, I wanted to treat it a little seriously in the idea of, like, in your mind, what would have made other you look more successful? What would have made the other you successful? Maybe not even look, but what would have been the hair, the clothes, some intangible quality that you couldn't put your finger on, but you knew was there. But I think a more interesting question might have been, what lesson did the other you learn? What was he there to prove? Perhaps it's something you've been struggling with, what you've been working on for a while. This kind of scenario brings to mind the Matthew 7, 1 through 5. We know that one, the mote and the beam, the mote in someone else's eye, but the beam in yours. What lesson did he have to learn that apparently you are still struggling from? Or perhaps, is it something that you're already struggling with? I'm sorry, I'm reading that wrong. No, yeah, okay, I have that right. Yeah, it's not unlikely that it's something that you're already struggling with, and perhaps another deeper thought onto that, what's the lesson that made him look more successful to you? What lesson did he already master that you hadn't? But to keep in mind is, while you may have been in the scenario, the example of folly, even the more successful version of you has room for improvement, as we all do. I want to read another tweet along the same line as we get into kind of the meat of what I want to talk about here. Another tweet from the same guy. Getting a little metaphysical here, bringing in some quantum physics, so I apologize for that in advance. In an infinite universe, there's an identical Earth with an identical you. And infinite yous mean there's also a successful version of you who views you with contempt. But let's not dwell on that, because there's also infinitely worse versions of yourself. Hey, way to go, champ. If the universe, in this model of an infinite universe that has been left to chance, then yeah, there must be other Earths, because the die must come up again at some point when you have an infinitely sided die with infinite numbers of rolls, if you want to look at that analogy. But to look at the idea that there are infinite yous that have done worse than you, infinite yous that screwed up harder, if you want to say it that way. Every second that we have is a chance for a mistake. Every moment is a chance where we may make a mistake, let our attitudes dictate something for the worse. But also every second is a chance to succeed, because there are also infinite better yous out there in that scenario. You can always be worse. You can always do worse. You can always do better. Something I've said before, Matthew 7, 13 through 14, about the wide path and the narrow path. When you're on the narrow path, it only takes one step to step off of it and be lost again. But in that same instance, it only takes one step to get back on, no matter how lost you are. Infinite chances, infinite possibilities to be better, to get back onto the path. And what keeps us off these paths? What keeps us on the path? I want to read one more tweet from this guy as I get into further the meat. Dreams flow from agency and are either learned or excused. Circumstances or opposition can halt ambition, at no fault of our own. And yet we more often fail due to painting our own fantasies with imaginary hurdles, secure in the belief of what could have been, if not for ourselves. We often orchestrate our own failures, our own shortcomings, just as often, if not more often, than we allow ourselves to know. Proper introspection, proper spiritual growth requires a degree of lucidity that you're able to look at yourself and through your own lies. For an example, with a little bit less stakes on it, I know I talked recently about the whole Enneagram thing and me being a type 9. In the initial, in my initial research in that, the general thing was, yeah, there's a lot of people out here who put tests out there that tell you what type you are. Is that, however, most of those tests can be reductive and wrong. And I think the only reason I got 9 was because as I was taking the test, I like to plan. I like to have plans. I like the idea of planning and having contingencies. I have a bag at home that I someday imagine will be just filled with anything I might need in a given situation, or something I can at least jerry-rig together to get the solution that I might need. That bag still sits there and it's still empty. Because as I was taking this quest, normally when I take these personality quizzes, I'm always like, I always rank high, I always try to rank high on the planning stuff. But then I thought about, and they always ask more than one question, which I always thought was weird about certain topics. Until this one, where I noticed the difference between what it was asking. One was like, do you like to plan for things? And I went, yes. And then another question later on said, do you enact plans for what may happen? And I thought, and I went, oh, no, I don't. And probably would have put me at a type 5, someone who likes to gather logic, gather knowledge for the day that he might need it, if I had answered like I normally did. But again, I had to stop and look at my own issues, because I like to plan, and I like to think, and I don't often act because I'm too busy thinking about the plan. We can go for a minute. I might be repeating myself a little bit. I feel like I've said something like this before, but it's been a while, so let's keep going. To go back to the moat and the beam, there's a potentiality to use that metaphor, that parable, as a matter of perspective, where the idea of someone else's moat is a beam in their own eye from their perspective, because it's much closer, especially if it's in the eye. But to them, your beam is a moat. We too often don't want to deal with our own beam because it's big and it looks heavy. And that's hard. But someone else has got a moat. That's small. That's not a big deal. And that's clearly what the parable is also trying to get across there. But when you're dealing with a moat and you're trying to deal with someone else, you're going into someone's eyes. You're going to need tweezers and them to hold still and for them to trust you with that. That's not something you can just go handle just because it's small. Despite the fact that you don't want to deal with the beam in your own eye, which is a big thing that you could just grab and huck out of the way if you wanted to. Too often we ignore our own problems and focus on other people's. In Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis, in talking about something like this, he says, I'm paraphrasing. I couldn't find the exact quote, unfortunately. I couldn't dig up the book and find it. But I'm paraphrasing that we too often are worried about the rocks in our own path that we believe people have set up before us, and we do not realize that we are just as often the rocks that crash someone else's ship and cause their dreams to sink. But in this many worlds interpretation, to go back to this idea of infinite us's and infinite chances to succeed, infinite chances to lose, it means we have limitless potential in this model that we're throwing out here today. And if we have limitless potential, that also means that on that infinitely sided die, it must have rolled at least once. Law of averages, that there's one Earth out there with one you on it that did it all right, that didn't muck it up, that stayed on the path and kept his head up and inspired others. And because it's still you, with, again, the exact same die rolls, you too have that potential to achieve that one out of infinite chance, to be better, to be someone perfect, to achieve, at the end of the day, our salvation and receive our ultimate potential, which in turn has no potential because it is already limitless. Hey, way to go, champ.